I have to honestly say one of the best records I have heard this year is the new Fleet Foxes record, which is Shore. And I have to be sure to spell it out, Shore. And it's a pleasure to welcome Robin Pecknold of Fleet Foxes to KUTX at home. Where is your home in this moment?
I am in Manhattan. Yeah.
You've been living in New York City for a long time, but do you live upstate as well?
No, I just rent a small spot in the city, and apart from that, before obviously the pandemic, I was just kind of would travel around a lot, see family on the West Coast, and just kind of had this as a small home base. But I've been here for the last 6, 7 months.
I put the new album Shore on, and the first word I heard was summer.
Yeah.
And then it reminded me that the first song I ever heard from Fleet Foxes was White Winter Hymnal.
Right.
And Shore came out right at the moment of the autumnal equinox, which was 8:31 in the morning Central Time, Tuesday, September 22nd. So I'm thinking there's something elemental for you about the seasons that's reflected in your work.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, I think there's something timeless about tying music to more kind of, I don't know, natural things or sylvan things, or, in the case of the equinox, more of this kind of celestial occurrence and less kind of, worrying about the day to day of our lives as much, or not, it, I think that's always attracted me in other music that I've listened to, just as music is kind of a refuge, or, things that are kind of outside of time a little bit. And that's much easier if you're not talking about, walking down Delancey Street in 1977 or something.
Which I did. I'm a native New Yorker.
Excellent.
Okay, so we're talking about time. The album Shore was recorded before and during quarantine. It had about a 2-year gestation from September 2018 to 2020. And it was done in New York and Paris and LA?
Yeah.
So tell me about when you listen to the record now, can you tell certain songs were done at certain times, or for you, is it just one piece that isn't notated by time?
No, I definitely hear the all of the various studios we worked at. When we were in France, that's where we were able to record Uwade, who sings the first song on the album, because she was studying at Oxford and it was easy for her to take the train down. So I have really fond memories of that recording day. Some of the drums were done at Aaron Dessner's spot upstate, but then most of them were done in LA, and they're very different characteristics to those two rooms, like drum sound wise. So I hear that difference for sure. It was a little bit like, filming a movie where you got to go to Tunisia to get that desert sunset, and you got to go to, Alaska to get that glacier, and you got to, there's a little bit of that, I think. And working in a small group, it made it cost effective to travel around. But then obviously it was a way different experience when lockdown hit, and then I was just finishing the album by sitting in my car on the side at a gas station on the side of the road. And, it was that was an interesting contrast, I think, for sure. And then it was also, that was where I finished all the lyrics, was just in gas stations. And it was, comparing that to this kind of bougie traveling around, nice, it almost was, the gas station ended up being the more appropriate venue for making like an honest set of lyrics than any of that kind of, high budget rigmarole.
Well, I couldn't have called that. And also, as someone on the outside, as everyone else is except for you, this really hangs together as a piece of music. I wouldn't call it a concept record, but it has one feel to me throughout. And maybe that says it's a success for what you did.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Let's talk about the title, Shore, which when I'm on the air as well, I always want to, just let people know that it's not Sure, it's Shore. And you had a really interesting comment about Shore. I'll just give a sentence from it. I see shore as a place of safety on the edge of something uncertain, staring at Whitman's waves reciting death.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. the record's so healing for me, and I know you personally, by your own admission, have gone through times of anxiety.
Mm.
How did you bring this peacefulness to life, to fruition on shore?
Well, I mean, the title kind of came to me. I had a surfing accident where I snapped my leash and I was kind of caught in this big set of waves, and then I was pretty far out to sea. And if you snap your leash, you've lost your life preserver, and you're just swimming to safety. And I think I started hyperventilating, and I was that was kind of the closest I've come to feeling like maybe I was going to die. And I think the feeling of relief I had when I did make it back to shore, I think that feeling really stuck with me, because you're just that sense of, and this is something we've experienced all year, just appreciating life most when it feels like it might be taken away from you. And that just like that feeling of how good you feel you know when you've been sick for a few days and you get better, and you thank the stars for your health, but how those things can be kind of invisible to us when we're not, when we're just going about our daily lives and nothing's wrong. And so I think that, for me wanting to make a brighter record, I guess, like, it's kind of holding those things in balance, like why would, what do I have to celebrate? Well, I have to celebrate the fact that I'm alive, and I, in a way that my heroes maybe aren't anymore. And, I can, I can live in a way they can't. And, holding those things in balance makes it easier for me to have access to, like, feelings of joy or brightness or, yeah. Yeah.
Well, whether it's your specific near-death experience or the sort of global feeling we have right now, both have their silver linings. And
Yeah.
that's been the blessing for me during this period. Not to say it's not offset by some terrible things.
Yeah.
But you mentioned your heroes, and I read somewhere some of the ones that inspired you, whether it's Nina Simone or Sam Cooke or people that I'm not as familiar with. So it's them celebrating life in the face of death that informed the work of Shore. Is that fair to say?
I think so. There were some kind of, you know, significant losses in our community, like Richard Swift and David Berman. People that we loved, and my friends loved, and my friends played with, and they. I knew for 2 years I knew that the first line I wanted to sing on the album was going to be for Richard Swift, and that stayed, and then as kind of things continued on, more names got added, and I just kind of got really into the idea of how music is this form of immortality in a way, and and Elliott Smith is still teaching his lessons to kids as we speak, and it's this means of transmitting kind of important lessons and states of mind and points of view that is just such a gift, and has been such a gift to me as a listener. And I guess I obviously was a music fan before I was a musician, and I feel like being a music fan is almost easier for me to embrace that identity than the quote unquote musician identity. And so just being able to kind of like foreground that on the album felt really natural to me.
You mentioned David Berman of Silver Jews. Richard Swift, I'm not as familiar with. I know Nathaniel Rateliff had a beautiful song about him, and it's Still All Right. Can you just tell me a tiny bit about Richard?
Richard is an incredible musician. We were definitely in touch in early days of Fleet Foxes. Hope to work together someday. He worked with many Casey Westcott and Christian Margot and Fleet Foxes. He worked with them in various projects. They went way back. Worked with Morgan Henderson and Fleet Foxes and Hamilton Lighthouser album. He worked with Kevin Morby on an album. He's just a great, and his music, he makes these wonderful songs with so much heart and so much ingenuity in how they're recorded and what they sound like, and I think it was also I was mentioning people that I was, the people I'm talking about, I was thinking about making music that maybe they would like, or that evoked their music in some way. That was another idea. That was another kind of guiding principle for sure.
You mentioned Hamilton Lighthouser. You mentioned Kevin Morby as connective tissue between you and Richard Swift. They're two of the guests on the record, Shore by Fleet Foxes, Daniel Rawson of Grizzly Bear, and then there's some other folks who I'm not as familiar with. Were there any other members of the band Fleet Foxes proper on this recording?
Well, every record has been kind of a different lineup. We've had super lucky to have a pretty consistent live lineup. And those guys have contributed to Crack Up and Helplessness Blues, and I think with this, the way that the pandemic, the way that it usually works is that, or the way that it's come to work best is that I kind of lay the album out, and then we have a week or two where people fill in some of the ideas at the end of kind of a year-long process of writing and recording, in smaller group, because for me, working in smaller groups honestly helps with my anxiety and helps just lets me be less tired through the process. That's just like something I've learned about myself over the years. And so when the pandemic changed the calculus of how that was going to pan out, because the album was totally half finished, it made more sense to me to kind of finish it how I could, without opening the doors to that, just because what I needed to do in a really small amount of time to get it out for September 22nd was both very clear to me, and also was just going to be a complete focus, like it was just going to require daily, just 12 hours a day, but I knew exactly what it needed to be. And then, those guys are amazing musicians, but we've never actually written songs together. I've always written all the songs and lyrics on Fleet Foxes records, and recorded most of the vocals and stuff. So I thought, instead of, an arrangement embellishment period with those guys, maybe we could use this time without touring to actually write songs together for the first time. Because I loved producing on this record. I loved being on that side of the glass, and kind of like getting good performances out of somebody that I admire, and so that became part of the plan for putting it out this way. And that's what I'm going to turn my attention to when this record is like a little bit more, things settle down a little bit with this record.
So next time you'll be in more of a collaborative situation with the other members of Fleet Foxes. You've always stacked your harmony vocals, and that I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you about sampling Brian Wilson for this record. Yeah. Speaking of stacking vocals, tell me about using a small snippet of Brian on Shore.
Yeah, I mean, that was such a fun little Easter egg. I'm so glad that they agreed to let us use that. He was obviously, like, it's just kind of him, some studio dialogue of his, and then him counting the song in, and then it's on a song that is like the most overdubs by far of any Fleet Foxes song, and it's from this recording that was on the Pet Sounds box set that I heard when I was a teenager, where he's just stacking vocal after vocal after vocal by himself, onto this idea for "Don't Talk, Put Your Head on My Shoulder." And I think that piece of music, more than any other one, is kind of what made me want to be a musician, which is weird because it wasn't a full song, and it didn't even make it onto the album, onto Pet Sounds. But just hearing someone kind of like, this cool 60s voice, and then this layer after layer after layer of these beautiful harmonies, and just like how, punk that almost was, of just like, I don't need anything. I don't even need a guitar. I can just, like, as long as I have a 4-track, I can like make this whole world to disappear into. I think it was just, and it was a road, it was a manual for harmony writing, because you're hearing how one voice is a little out of tune, but it makes the whole thing richer once all 17 voices are in there or whatever. You're hearing one line going up, one going down in contrary motion. You're hearing these chord clusters, and it was just a wonderful, I recommend anyone find that, but it really did, that piece of music did change my life. And it was kind of like, thinking about like that Brian Wilson song as kind of the beginning of a journey that kind of ended in the song that it's part of, because that's like the fullest, most overdubby, studio rat kind of song I've ever done. It was very meaningful to me personally.
Well, I'm with you. People should check out that Pet Sounds box and the
Yeah,
isolation mixes on Don't Talk or on the other songs.
yeah,
And as a fan of that, it's nice for me to see you and your band carrying on in the tradition, but taking it to new places.
yeah.
Um, Earlier in this chat, you were talking about writing lyrics in a phone booth. My understanding is by February, you had all the music, but not the lyrics. So is that how you usually write all the music and then come to the lyrical subject?
No, this is the first time that I've been that kind of backlogged or that kind of roadblocked by lyrics, because every other time there's been, I think for the last two albums, Blues and Crack Up, I actually did some solo touring with Joanna Newsom in the, in those years before the albums were done. So I had to get lyrics ready for those shows, because she's like the best musician ever, and I would never say no to anything she asked me to do. Um, so this was the biggest bottleneck I've ever had as far as lyrics goes, for sure. And I don't want to get in that position again. But I think it was really down to like, I was just working on music, and trying to keep up with 2019, trying to like, this supercharged economy, all these new bands, gotta get back out on the road, kind of in that mindset a little too much, and no lyrics were really, what lyrics are you going to write from that mindset? There's nothing really there. But then once I was in quarantine for 3 months and had this totally different perspective, um, the lyrics kind of all grew out of that.
You mentioned the album Crack Up. How did Crack Up's tour and the density of that record inform Sure?
Yeah, that tour was, that was an incredible experience in so many ways. We got to play the Hollywood Bowl. We got to play all of these incredible places with all these great bands. And, we were like, we had the way the operation was running was great. And everyone was, um, was on the tour. I loved very much. And that was, great experience for the most part. And then I think it went on a little too long. I ended up having a lot of neck pain, a neck injury that made it really painful to sing every night. But a tour like that, it can kind of feel like a moving train that's impossible to get off. So I wasn't able to like maybe cancel some shows that I should have to deal with my health, and that had an effect on my mental health for sure, and physical health. And it ended up being kind of a 2-year 170 show tour. And I think that is just, I've learned maybe that's just too much touring for me in one go, for sure. So I doubt that I'll, there will be a tour that extensive again. I'd rather it be more balanced and more frequent, because part of the reason it was like that was because we'd taken 5 years off the road. So, I wanted to work. I wanted to keep making music. I didn't want the experience of that tour to kind of put me off from the part that I love so much, which is making songs and working with people and writing music. And it just meant having to, the music needed to be this kind of source of energy or source of life. And that was going to be like, because you can either listen to music that you want to match your mood, or you listen to music to kind of change your mood. And this was more like working on music to change my mood and kind of like pull me, out of that exhaustion or out of that kind of, post-tour malaise a little bit.
And I know it's pretty far in the rear view mirror at this point, but you did allude to the fact, or you mentioned that you had taken this 5-year break. There was about 6 years in between Helplessness Blues and Crack Up. So now that 5-year break, which you took to go to school there in New York City at Columbia, now that it's in the rear view mirror, you're good with it. You're glad you did it, because doing it at the time must have been a little freaked out, would have freaked me out, thinking, wow, I have this band, I've gained all this momentum, people know who we are, and now I'm just gonna boom for 5 years. So question, in the rear view mirror now, are you fine with taking those 5 years off?
Well, I think, yeah, I mean, I'm more, very proud of the music that's been made since then. And I think that, there was just, I think, after Helpless Blues, I think that, getting wrapped up in this, there was like a definite like folk boom that I was conscious of being a part of, that I felt connected to, but also like aspects of it were like, this feels like maybe this is, you don't want to get like swept under by this fad, and you don't want to, if you want to have, be creative and have like a long creative life, it seemed to me that even if it seemed a little weird to step back at that moment, it was really in the interest of kind of a long-term sustainability. Because the options after Helpless Blues were either um, try and compete at the arena folk level, which I don't think I would ever have felt comfortable doing, because that style of music, I just don't think it translates at that scale, like in the best, the best, like other styles of music, like to me are more appropriate to that scale. Or do something else that was reactive against that, which seemed also um, not as pure or something, to just be thinking about context completely. So instead of like, it just seemed like the context, I didn't have a good answer to the context, and that's a disappointment because, I love working on songs, but it got to a spot where I couldn't work on songs without thinking about the business or the career side of it. And it just didn't feel good. And so I just put it away, and I couldn't carry it. And I just needed to drop it for a couple of years. And, so I feel like now where it's at, it's like you know, to be able to still be doing this 12 years in, and to like have it be well received, but have it be different music, but not reactionary, not different in a reactionary way, but just trying to build some catalog of songs that are solid, and that albums that have their own identities. I feel like much more at peace now, for sure. And this feels like, I feel grateful for the opportunity to continue doing this in this way.
Well, your instincts have wound up being impeccable if the proof is in the pudding. Talking with Robin Pecknold, Fleet Foxes' new album is Sure. It's their fourth, and I really enjoyed getting some insight into not only this record, but the prior records. And when we post this interview, I was going to post a link to the movie that accompanies the new album, Sure. So before we say goodbye, could you just tell me a little bit about this film? There's film footage that accompanies every song, right?
Yeah, a friend of mine, Kirsty Jan Wordall, she, we were working every day in the studio in New York, and she happened to go on a road trip around Washington State. And, I asked her if she could take her Super 16 camera along, because she's an incredible filmmaker. And she totally went above and beyond, and made this beautiful film to, kind of a, minimalist road film all around Washington, and we were getting updates from her. I was so jealous, she's in the Hoh rainforest or in the Palouse or in these beautiful locations in Washington, and we're, nose to the grindstone trying to get the album done. But so I was living vicariously, and just she went above and beyond. And I think it's, the album's quite dense at times, but the film is always this nice kind of contrast to that, beautiful kind of, your eyes are forced to look at one thing, and then that opens up your ears in a new way or something. And she did, amazing job, and I'm excited to see what she does next, for sure.
Well, here's to the great state of Washington, where I got married just because I loved it so much. And here's to New York City, where you are today.
Yeah.
And here's to Robin Pecknold and Fleet Foxes and their fantastic fourth album, Sure. Here's to you, man. Thank you very much.
Jody, thank you.
It's a pleasure talking to you.
You as well. Thank you so much.